This is a frequency table for categorical variables that I'm going to go over with you, and we'll fill in the cells as we talk about what a frequency table is. Essentially, a frequency table is a table that's used for categorical variables, and it lists categories and gives a count or frequency and percentage, i.e. relative frequency, for each one. So in this frequency table that I set up, the first column here we have number of days. The second column I have number of cars sold. So let's assume that we're talking about a car dealership where for days 1 and 2, the first 2 days of the week, this dealership sold 7 cars. On days 3 and 4, the dealership sold 9 cars. On days 5 and 6, this dealership sold 15 cars. And on day 7, the last day of the week, the dealership sold 4. So we have filled in our first 2 columns of our frequency table. Now what's this cumulative frequency? Well, cumulative frequency represents the total number of cars sold as the week goes on. So for days 1 and 2, of course, 7 cars were sold, and we see that right here in the first cell. Days 3 and 4, I'm going to write 16, because 7 plus 9 gives me 16. For the next cell down, I write 31. That's 7 plus 9 plus 15 gives me 31. And finally at the bottom, 35. 7 plus 9 plus 15 plus 4 gives me 35. And so the cumulative frequency, if I fill it in correctly, at the end I should have the total number of cars sold for the week. The relative frequency represents the number of cars sold by percentage. So for days 1 and 2, I would have 20%, which I'm going to write as a decimal, 0.20. I get this amount by dividing 7 by 35. That equals 20%. On days 3 and 4, I have 0.257, or 25.7%. And I calculate this by taking 9 and dividing by 35. So that's the cars that were sold on days 3 and 4 divided by my total number of cars sold for the week. I do the same thing for the next 2 categories. On days 5 and 6, 15 cars were sold divided by the total number of cars sold for the week. That gives me 0.429, or 42.9%. And finally, for day 7, 4 cars were sold. So I divide 4 by 35, and it turns out that 0.114, or 11.4% of cars were sold that week. So now the last thing we need to fill in is our cumulative relative frequency. And just like the cumulative frequency, the cumulative relative frequency is going to add up the percentages throughout the week. So here in the first cell, I write 0.20 for 20%. Next, I'm going to add 20% and 25.7%, and that's going to give me 0.457. Then I'll add 20%, 25.7%, 42.9%. That gives me 0.886, or 88.6%. And finally, when I take the sum of all 4 percentages, 0.20, 0.257, 0.429, 0.114, I I get a sum of 1.0 or 100%, which is what I should end up with. Whenever you take the cumulative relative frequency, if you've done it correctly, you should end up with 1 or 100% in your final cell. And so this is a frequency table for categorical variables.